Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today as I share some of the learnings we at Hilton had over the course of the last couple of years as we navigated our way through this pandemic. My name is Esquero, and I head up the Insights, Planning, and Strategy team for Hilton Marketing and Loyalty in Asia Pacific. And my team is responsible for brand and audience strategy and the measurement of our communications to consumers in the region. So today, I wanted to really cover some approaches we use to pivot to some new strategies and attract new customers using data during this really challenging time, and some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. I hope to connect with some of you after the conference, and I look forward to some of your questions. Now, I don't think I have to reiterate the impact COVID has had on travel. So almost overnight, we watched as the core of what we market and how we marketed go out the window. So in some countries, we saw demand practically disappear overnight. So consumers went from a world where we could inspire and talk to them about taking a long weekend away on Koh Samui to this, to being stuck in their apartments, working from home as the norm, and business and holiday travel disappearing. Everything that we knew about traditional marketing really went out the window. Our media campaigns were paused, our research projects were frozen, and we needed to learn very quickly how to adapt our business to a time of no business. So I won't pretend that the first few months were easy because we saw that all of the data that we had were pointing and giving us different signals. However, we also saw some really early glimmers of hope. So places like China, Japan, Australia saw some really interesting demand patterns, and we wanted to really capitalize and use data to understand how we could connect with our customers during this time. So while the mix of travelers and visitors to our own channels were changing, some of the content that they were looking and consuming also looked different. So we took all of this data to quickly learn how to optimize and make sure that we were capitalizing on what was happening. And despite this challenging year, while travel demand was certainly low, we were able to launch two of our biggest campaigns in Asia Pacific. So in March of 2021, we introduced our new co-branded credit card with American Express in Japan, which was the first expansion of this relationship following a very strong partnership in the US. So we launched at a time when states of emergency were being announced throughout Japan, and domestic and international travel was practically impossible. However, after 1 year, acquisitions for that program are very strong, and we were able to provide even more value to some of our most loyal members in that market. In June of last year, we also launched our Dine Like a Member campaign throughout Asia Pacific after a successful launch in China. And this time, once again, coincided with a time of new rolling lockdowns across Asia Pacific. But despite this, the Dine Like a Member program saw some really great traffic to our outlets from domestic customers, which was a core target of our campaign. So how did we decide to move forward and still find success with some of these new programs despite the kinds of years that we've had? Well, we really started with data. And in the next few minutes, I wanted to share three quick lessons that help us drive data insights into strategy, and particularly as we look at how we could develop new audiences and markets. So the first lesson we learned is around triangulating data and identifying what was meaningful versus what was noise. So I'm sure most of you in this room have had to grapple with similar challenges. I've heard over and over that we as an industry are a data-rich but insights-poor industry. So how did we actually learn to drive better insights from all of the different data sets that we had? First, we looked across our sources of information to help develop our baselines and provide some benchmarks. So three key sources that we looked at that really helped us drive strategy are: one, search and social trends. So here, things that we looked at, for example, were conversations and changes to audience activities. So we tried to understand who was driving the conversations, how the nuance and the context of those conversations were changing over time. We also used traffic data to our own channels to have a view of engagement and to really understand how, if there were any changes to the consumer journey. And then finally, and most importantly, we were closely monitoring our different audiences to ensure that our brand health measures were healthy. So this includes our brand tracking, but also making sure that we were talking to our customer-facing teams who were the closest to the market in this time. So some really helpful tactics that helped us quickly identify what was noise versus what was actionable were three things. One was around establishing benchmarks. So benchmarking was really key to establishing noise. Prior to COVID, we used CSAT and social listening to really optimize our experience at our properties. But we were also able to mine that data during COVID to compare any emerging topics. So as an example, in China, prior to COVID, 60 to 70% of social chatter was typically noise. But having had looked at that data before and classifying the rest into useful themes, we were quickly able to pull out what were some new emerging areas of interest. So for example, social chatter gave us ideas around F&B trends and topics, topics around cleanliness and safety, but also emerging interest in staycations and locations. So in launching Dine Like a Member, benchmarking also gave us the data to prove that the demand was there. So F&B interest was already stable or growing in some markets, even with lockdowns in place. But this interest really was interesting as we dug deeper because it was coming from people who had never had interactions with us in the past. So not only did benchmarking help identify new audiences, it also provided ideas on how to talk to them. So the second really useful tactic for actionability of data is making sure that we were triangulating sources and connecting themes across different areas. So reviews, CSAT surveys, even email click-throughs provided us with the confidence to recommend particular approaches. So usually when we saw a theme from a few different sources, we became pretty confident in the result. For example, for co-brand, we realized that there were pockets of demand that remained at very healthy levels. So when we were deciding to launch, we specifically targeted these very engaged customers and used their demand patterns to shape the launch message as well as the offer strategy. Finally, we also kept revisiting the results. So looking at trends, particularly during COVID, can be sometimes dizzying because they change so much. But it also provides some guidance on whether it's time to refresh your audience or even your message. So the two campaigns that I mentioned, and with our tracking in general, we make sure that we are revisiting and refreshing all of those results to make sure that we maintain confidence in our tactics, but it also gives us additional areas of or additional sources of new ideas and content as we are communicating. So the second area that I wanted to chat and talk about today was how to use these insights to protect commercial performance and maximize the consumer opportunity. A big application of insights for us to commercial strategy is in how we use our brands. So globally, we have 19 brands and across multiple markets, but we have many consumers in this market who may never have stayed at our hotels in the past. So using insights and data to establish our brand hierarchy was really key in optimizing our brand and product story. So this at a time when consumers had a different mindset around travel. Knowing when to lead with our master brand, for example, versus our honors brand versus our individual trading brands or even our individual F&B outlets allowed us to talk at the right level on different channels with the right customers. So one benefit to this approach is that it opens up connections with people who may not have been willing to engage with us in the past. So for example, for Dine Like a Member, people who may not opt to receive communications from us or to download our app may now browse or be curious after their F&B experience. So not only does it benefit the F&B program to engage with them through that activity, but it also provides an additional pipeline of new customers who may now be open to staying with us on their next holiday. So overall, there are 3 areas where brand insights can drive better commercial success. As I already mentioned, knowing which brand has the right to speak makes acquisition strategy much easier to develop. In the last few years, we have capitalized on this, on our strong brand awareness in the region to introduce new brands and offerings. So for example, while people knew us as a hotel company, we were not broadly known as a credit card or a restaurant operator. But by leaning on consumers' knowledge of our enterprise brand and knowing what we stand for, it allowed us to build awareness for some of these new activities pretty quickly. And very closely related to acquisition, brand insights also helps drive a better retention strategy. And while we were going after some new audiences, leaning on our connection to quality and the premium nature of our brand allowed us to capitalize on trialers and new members. We looked to reinforce not only why they should engage with us in the first place, but we wanted to use that brand equity to lower any perceived risk of trialing any of our brands. So by then continuing that conversation with value messages through honors and recognition through the honors program, we're able to deepen those conversations really quickly. So as a result, some of the new members that we're acquiring through these new approaches are overperforming in engagement. So as we continue to talk to them, we're making sure that those interactions continue to reinforce their early experiences and encouraging them to keep coming back. And from a pricing perspective, this is really key in developing a really engaged audience from the start. An audience that is less price sensitive, an audience who is more aware of the value for money messages that your brand has, and much more likely to engage directly. So the last lesson that I wanted to share pretty quickly was on being comfortable with some failures. So we took a test and learn approach this year to really help us sharpen our tactics. And certainly not everything has been successful. However, by allowing ourselves to try, we were able to find or eliminate channels that really strengthened our approaches to communications. So some of the more interesting tests were around language. So not a surprise, Hilton is, a heritage American company, and a lot of our communications are primarily in English. But during the pandemic, we wanted to test a few channels in local languages because of those new domestic audiences that we were seeing come to us with some mixed success. So email, for example, seems to be a channel that can probably stay mostly in English. Outside of a few markets like Japan, performance was not significantly stronger in language. And I'm interested to hear from some of you if this is the case for you as well. But for us, this was an interesting surprise. But where language did count was in digital. So specifically app and web banners on our own channels. So no surprises, I think for some of the media connected teams in this room, that localized banners work better. We see this in paid media activities all the time. But one interesting note for us was that these local banners also performed well, even when they were surrounded by English content. So the mixing of languages, which sometimes can be seen as a bad experience, was actually a good outcome for us. So now we're testing a few more channels with mixed languages to see how we can bring some of these learnings forward to future campaigns. But really the big takeaway for us across this experiment is that your in-language experience may not need to be perfect to drive better results. This also helped broaden the set of channels that we were using and that we considered in deploying to get some messages out to local audiences. So to quickly sum up, it has been certainly an interesting few years for travel, but through these challenges, there were some great learnings that we were able to capitalize on. So by connecting data learnings, we identified new audiences and new offerings that have helped us boost engagement. By sticking to our brand truth, we were able to quickly establish strong relationships and drive relevance. And by being comfortable with some failed experiments, we have found some good foundations for new tactics to help us optimize our communications. So I hope you found some of these learnings useful, and thank you for spending the time with me today. I look forward to some of your comments and questions and look forward to connecting with you after the conference. Thank you very much.